Yes, and that's certainly any new products that we're bringing to market, we have to have tested for efficacy, for safety, to really understand the mechanism of action, et cetera. Where I think we fall short, and where I would say that we have not been as patient-centric as we should, is that we don't always have a good representation of the market in our clinical trials. And in keeping with the theme of our conversation, very often clinical trials are not very inclusive of women. And there are many, many excellent researchers, Dr. Vivian Penn at NIH, and others who have really demonstrated, Dr. Paula Johnson, who is the new president of Wellesley College, who have really shown that disease presents differently in women and men, and that therapeutics are not always equally efficacious in women and men. And the absence of women in clinical trials has often not brought that to the fore. And the same, I think, with other minority or non-majority populations. So in that regard, I think we've not been as patient-centric as we could be. We've been rather narrow in our definition of patient, but certainly the role of patient and patient data remains critical. And my hope is that we can perhaps explore new ways of developing drugs where we are less dependent on clinical trials with live human subjects, and maybe we can find ways to use data sets.
I think patient centricity is a quite recent topic coming to life as we speak. And it makes sense to me because actually the patients are the end users of the product that is being investigated. Those are not the prescribers, those are not the physicians, professors that will be working on the trials. The patient is the end user of a product. And I think it's good that a patient is really well informed and involved. So beyond the participating in a clinical trial, patients should be really well informed about the product. And I think it's coming to that point that actually companies will need to involve the patients more and more, patient groups, in whichever therapeutic area we're talking about. I think the patient groups should be involved and should have majority of the information that is usually provided to physicians. I think the patients should know, and I think we're coming to the point where the patient centricity is really important, and in the heart of the clinical trials, it should be that way. So I think we are approaching that point.
So in terms of data with respect to patients and clinical research, the question will be making sure that the provider has obtained all the rights so this data can not only be used, but reused. So an example would be establishing a cohort for one clinical trial, and then using big data to look at the people with their particular medical histories and in a more accelerated way assemble a cohort for the second clinical trial. So that's where big data comes in, to kind of sort through the information you have. And with respect to patient centricity, it's really an issue of finding where they fit and how it enables research to be done. And in today's fast-moving world, it's advantageous to take IT and use that plus big data to help assemble those cohorts.
Traditionally, clinical trials is only looking at generating data, and patients are looked at as subjects to generate the data needed. Patient centricity is something that companies need to look into when they conduct clinical trials. What do you mean by patient centricity? Patient centricity is getting the patient as a collaborator in the clinical trials. Patients' needs, patients' experience is important for collaboration. They need to know that the doctors, the sponsors, are looking into their needs and convenience, and also what's in it for them. So that's what patient centricity is. And if we do not educate patients, and if we do not take the stance of patient centricity in clinical trials, it will be difficult to maintain and to retain the patient within the trial. and that is costly for companies.
Clinical trials are being done for the patient. The center of the universe of pharma industry is patients. You develop medicines for patients, and clinical trials are a part of this development process. Let me give you a simple example. You see, most of the pain medication has now gone into patches. Everyone's using patches. I don't think so now people swallow tablets or capsules anymore for painkillers. This is one of the good examples in pharma industry for patient centricity. Earlier you had many medicines which were 4 times a day or 5 times a day. Now you have pills which can be taken once a day. This is again an example of patient centricity. What does the future hold? Now our great scientists, they are working on medicines that can be simply inhaled. You don't need to take an injection, you don't need to take a shot, nothing, you simply inhale them. This is where the industry is going, and everyone has realized the patient compliance is the most important. And in the industry terms, it's called patient centricity. In layman's term, it's called user interface.